Okay, so in our last installment here, we discussed creating arrays, and then we had the array created using this populate array method. And then we did some string splitting so we could do a little bit of math on the array that we loaded with information. Okay, so this time we're going to fill that array from a different location. We're actually going to pull that from a file. So first, let's take a look at the file that we're going to use. And the file looks like this. That first line is the number of entries that we have, and then each subsequent line is the input that we're going to use. Now, something to be aware of. Make sure there are no lines after the last line in your file, and make sure that there are no spaces after the numbers here. Those will get read into the program, and they will create some unpredictable behavior. So for now, you'll want a format that goes exactly like this, which corresponds to the code. Okay, so I have this file. It's called ctemp_movies.txt. Now the first thing I've got to do is I've got to add some things to the top of my source code. Alright, so we need a little extra love from java.io, and also I believe scanner comes from java.util, and we're going to use scanner as well. So the first thing I've done is I've added those in. Now let's just go ahead and shrink up the method that we have for populate array. And we're going to create a new method that says populate array from file. Let's go ahead and read through this and see what it says. So just like populate array, we are going to return a string array from this. Now, it is good practice to use a try-catch loop when you're opening a file. Probably that's not entirely necessary. Like I said, it's good practice. Basically, try means see if you can do it, and if not, in this case, we're going to print out an error, and then we're going to return nothing from our method. Alright, so new scanner. This sounds really familiar, and this time we're going to use java.io.file. I can actually take this out. And we're going to read from that file just like we read from input. So that code is actually pretty much the same as we've seen before. Okay, so I actually just tried taking out the try-catch loop, and it turns out you've absolutely got to have it. So one thing I want to draw your attention to is that the slashes here, you have to have two of those because you have to escape it. So whenever you are looking for a file on your computer, it's going to have two slashes to it. Okay, so this is how we basically open a scanner to a file, which should be at least sort of familiar to you. Now, that first line, if we take a look at our file, that first line has a number, and that number is the number of entries that we have in the file, the number of data lines, 6. So the first thing I do is I create a string variable called firstLine, and I'm going to read that first line from the file into that variable. Now that I've done that, I'm creating an integer variable called arraySize. And to figure out what the array size is, I'm going to parse an int from the first line that was in my data file. Once I've done that, I'm actually going to create the array, or dimension the array, with that size. So you can see I use array size here and array size here. So now that I've done that stuff, just like in some of our programs we loop through scanner until we type in quit, basically, in this case, we're going to loop through that file until there's no next line, until we're at the end of the file. Of course, we start at record 0, and the way that that's going to work out is as we step through, the first time we come through, record index will be 0. We'll add 1 to record index once we go through the first time, and you can see when we do our assignment inside the array, there's my return array, and I am adding next line into this element right there. So some of the stuff might look a lot different, but it's actually very, very, very similar to techniques that you've already learned. Okay, so now I no longer want to say movie list comes from populate array. Now string movie list comes from populate array from file. And let's see if this will run. Boom, just like that. Since I used the same format in my array that I had used in my other method, no big changes there. One of the things I want to draw your attention to is over on the left, you see I can click right into populate array or populate array from string, and I can see what's going on in there. So I have both pieces of code. They won't hurt anything. You can go back and forth and try each one out a little bit differently.